Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to unpack one of the most powerful and honestly heartbreaking pieces of classic Hindi literature. We're looking at Munshi Premchand's Mritak Bhoj, which translates to The Death Feast. Now, Premchand is famously known as the emperor of storytelling, and as you'll see, he completely masterfully dissects the devastating consequences of societal hypocrisy here. This isn't just a simple tale about a grieving family. It's a forensic look at how toxic traditions can literally dismantle lives.
So here's a question I want you to keep in the back of your mind as we go through this. What happens when a society values the rituals of the dead more than the survival of the living? We're going to see how Premchand uses this exact premise not just to tell a story, but to hold up a stark, unforgiving mirror to societal expectations and this obsession with false prestige.
Section 1. A Dying Man's Fear. The Final Wish of Seth Ramnath. To really understand the magnitude of Premchand's critique, we have to start at the very beginning. Imagine a heavy, fading evening. Seth Ramnath, who was once a pretty renowned merchant, is lying on his deathbed. And with his failing breath, he gives his young, completely exhausted wife Sushila one final desperate instruction. Do not sell this house, Sushila. Even if you starve, do not lose the roof over your head. You see, he knows that his extensive medical treatments have entirely wiped out their life savings. The only tangible security left in the world for Sushila and their 3 young children, Mohan, Sohan, and Revati, is the physical bricks and mortar of their home. It's their absolute last shield against the world.
But, as you might guess, that shield is immediately tested. Ramnath passes away, and overnight, the tragedy of his death shifts into something far more terrifying, the brutal reality of survival. Sushila is suddenly a vulnerable widow in a highly patriarchal society. She has no money, she has 3 young mouths to feed, and she is armed with absolutely nothing but the shelter of that house.
Section 2. The vultures demand a feast. Enter the pillars of the community.
The very morning after Ramnath's death, local leaders start arriving. Now, these are men who completely ignored him while he was sick and suffering, but suddenly they're front and center, wearing these masks of deep sympathy. Premchand uses this cast of characters brilliantly to show dramatic irony. On the surface, you have Seth Dhaniram, the respectable community leader, Seth Kubadas, the helpful, wealthy friend, and Seth Jabbermal, the community elder. But let's look at their true roles. Dhaniram is the instigator of their ruin, Kubadas acts as a vulture ready to steal their primary asset, and Jabbermal is a predatory usurer. Let's be real, these aren't pillars of the community, they are scavengers ready to pick a grieving family clean under the guise of tradition.
And here is exactly how they strike. They corner a penniless, terrified Sushila and hit her with this intense psychological manipulation. His death feast must be such that the world remembers. Will you keep Ramnath's soul hungry? Think about that. They completely weaponize her religious duty. They tell her that if she doesn't host a massive, expensive Mritak Bhoj, a death feast, her husband's soul is going to wander as a hungry ghost. They use the community's so-called prestige to force an impossible financial burden onto a woman who can barely afford a burial shroud.
Which brings us to a staggering number, 20,000 rupees. How does a penniless widow pay for a massive feast for the whole town? Well, enter Seth Kubadas, the helpful friend. He steps in and offers to generously buy her house, a house that's actually worth over 100,000 rupees, for a predatory fraction of its value. Just 20,000. He uses the extreme pressure of the feast to effectively steal her children's future right out from under her.
Section 3. Trading the future for food. The illusion of prestige.
Despite the desperate protests of Sushila's brother Santlao, who rightfully calls it daylight robbery, the sheer weight of the community's demands just crushes the family's resistance. Sushila puts her thumbprint on the sale papers, trading her children's entire future just to feed the town for an afternoon. And this perfectly illustrates the core hypocrisy of the story. On one side, the day of the feast is an absolute sensory indulgence. Sweets are frying in expensive ghee, hundreds of people are eating, burping, and praising Ramnath's name. They applaud Sushila for keeping her husband's honor intact. But on the other side, the actual reality? Sushila is huddled in a dark corner of the doorway, clutching her children, crying silently. She's watching every bite these men take, knowing they are literally swallowing the bricks of her home and the future of her children.
Let's break down the harsh economics of this despair. From that predatory 20,000 rupee house sale, 10,000 rupees vanished instantly into the feast.
Another 5,000 was suddenly extracted for so-called old debts. That left Sushila with just 5,000 rupees. A lifetime of security completely evaporated in a single afternoon.
Section 4. The Descent into Darkness, a Timeline of Cruelty.
Losing the house wasn't the end of their torment, sadly. It was really just the opening act. The community got their feast, but the family was left to face a brutal world entirely alone. Barely 1 month after the feast, Kuber Das evicts them from their own home to turn it into a warehouse. Fast forward 3 years, the family is living in a damp, decaying slum. Sushila is reduced to a skeleton, working odd jobs, and her eldest son is forced into child labor. Then in the 4th year, the monsoon hits, and her youngest son, Mohan, contracts typhoid.
Desperate for medicine, the family turns back to the very men who demanded they sacrifice everything for community honor. And look at their response. Dhani Ram hides in his house, claiming he's deep in prayer and can't be disturbed. Kuber Das tells them it's not his problem, he already paid them for the house. The local pundit, the same guy who gorged himself at the feast, chases young Ravati away, telling her their suffering is simply bad karma. Completely abandoned by these hypocrites, little Mohan dies in his mother's arms without a single drop of medicine.
Now we hit rock bottom, marked by a seemingly tiny number, 10 rupees. That was the monthly rent of their miserable slum. But for a starving widow who just lost a child, 10 rupees was an unscalable mountain. And it's this tiny number that sets up the ultimate betrayal. This builds to a truly horrifying climax. First, their landlord, who is, of course, a respected member of the community, demands 3 months of unpaid rent, just 30 rupees. Second, knowing full well she can't pay, he offers to waive the debt if Sushila agrees to marry off her 13-year-old daughter, Ravati, to a wealthy 50-year-old man. Finally, Sushila's maternal instinct just flares up. She roars like a lioness, fiercely refusing to sell her daughter, declaring she would rather die on the streets. So what does the landlord do? He throws them out into the street.
Section 5. A tragic final escape. The Panchayat's decree.
Now we reach the climax of Premchand's story. With Sushila's health completely failing, it falls upon teenage Revati to step up as the breadwinner, scrubbing pots and floors just to keep them alive. Seeing her vulnerability, the predatory Kuber Das tries to lure Revati, literally throwing a wad of tash at her to become his mistress. But Revati's response is incredibly powerful. She throws the money right back in his face, shouting, "We may be poor, but we are not for sale. Keep your filthy wealth." She spits on the community that let her brother die and turned her mother into a living corpse.
But defiance always has a price here. Kuber Das's ego is heavily bruised. So what does he do? He calls a panchayat, a community council. These leaders weaponize morality and tradition all over again. They declare Revati out of control and rule that, for her own good, she must be forcefully married off to none other than Seth Shabarmal, the 50-year-old usurer. With this ruling, the community deliberately slams shut every single door of survival for the mother and daughter.
Faced with this absolute trap, Sushila and Ravati make a devastating choice. One path offered by the community meant relentless exploitation, poverty, and forced surrender to predators. Their only other escape was the dark, roaring depths of the Ganga River on a rainy night. Believing that literally even hell would be better than living among these vultures, a mother and daughter embrace, jump into the raging waters, and drown in each other's arms, finally finding peace.
Section 6. Premchand's timeless social warning. The cost of fake prestige.
The morning after, the bodies are found. And incredibly, the community leaders actually express relief that the women died quietly, saying it saved the town from a scandal. But Santlal, Sushila's brother, finally explodes, and his words capture Premchand's entire thesis. This is not suicide, it is murder. You have blood on your hands for your false prestige. Premchand is explicitly telling us here that systemic exploitation, when it's masked as tradition and community honor, is nothing less than an act of sheer violence. They didn't just die. They were driven into that river by a society that valued a feast over a family. Which leaves us with a final, lingering question. Is fake prestige worth human lives? And what is a true tribute to the departed? Premchand wrote this story decades ago, but his critique of bankrupting families for extravagant social rituals remains terrifyingly relevant today. Are we truly honoring the dead by destroying the living? Think about how this applies to the pressures we still see around us, and ask yourself what it really means to support a family in grief. Thanks for exploring this with me today, and keep questioning the world around you.